When a nation once locked out of the space arena begins building the very stage for humanity's future, are we underestimating the one now rewriting the rules?
For decades, the United States and its Western allies have ruled the skies not just with rockets and satellites, but with values, influence, and the power to define international norms. The International Space Station ISS, Mars exploration missions, and the global GPS system all stood as declarations that space belonged to the superpowers. And yet, in the shadow of exclusion, a new force has quietly taken flight. China, a country once banned from international space cooperation, has not only developed formidable space capabilities on its own, but is now expanding its influence by inviting the world to ascend with it. From the state-of-the-art Tiangong space station to a growing web of international partnerships, Beijing is no longer merely joining the game, it is redesigning the playing field. This article will take you deep into that transformation, from the historical backdrop of China's exclusion to the emerging space alliance now leads America's growing alarm, and the unfolding prospect of a new Cold War, this time beyond Earth's orbit. Space is no longer just a dream, it has become a strategic battleground, and those who lead the way will define the future. Historical context: China and space exploration. For more than half a century, space exploration has been dominated by a small group of major powers such as the United States, Russia, Europe, and Japan. Despite being a populous nation with rapidly growing scientific capabilities, China was long regarded as an outsider in the race to conquer space. However, over the past 2 decades, the country has quietly, but decisively risen, step by step, building an independent space ecosystem that is now beginning to reshape the global landscape. In 2011, the U.S. Congress passed the VOLF Amendment, a law prohibiting NASA and related government agencies from cooperating with China in the field of space exploration. The stated reason was concerns over national security and the risk of Chinese technology theft. This decision not only excluded China from international space programs, but also shut the door on any hope of participating in the International Space Station, ISS, the most prominent symbol of cross-national collaboration in space. Yet instead of retreating, China chose the path of self-reliance. Quietly, but with unwavering determination, the country began constructing a space program with its own distinct signature. To change lunar missions successfully landed probes on the moon, including the first-ever landing on the moon's far side. Following this, the Tiangong Mars mission made China the 3rd country to successfully land a probe on Mars. The most pivotal milestone, however, came with the launch of the Tiangong space station, an independent orbital outpost operated solely by the China National Space Administration (CNSA). Between 2020 and 2022, China completed the deployment and assembly of the core modules Tian, Wenchen, and Mention, making Tiangong the only functioning space station other than the ISS currently orbiting the Earth. What's remarkable is not only the technical success, but the strategic thinking behind it. While the West continues to maintain a relatively exclusive model of cooperation, China has opened the doors of Tiangong to developing nations, inviting them to participate in scientific research aboard the station. This policy of open yet selective cooperation has not only boosted China's international prestige, but has also created a self-sufficient space ecosystem free from Western dependence. From a country once excluded from the game, China has now become the architect of a new one. It has not only proven its capability in autonomous space technology, but is now redrawing the map of global space power, laying the groundwork for new strategic space alliances in the years to come. China's new space alliance. Who is joining? In an era where space technology symbolizes not only human ingenuity, but also global power dynamics, China's effort to build a new space alliance marks a significant strategic turning point. Once isolated from international cooperation, China now not only possesses its own space station Tiangong but has also emerged as a magnet for countries across continents, forming a space ecosystem that rivals the decades-old Western-led order. Since the US enacted the Wolf Amendment in 2011, which barred NASA from cooperating with China, Beijing has been excluded from major international space programs. Yet contrary to grim forecasts, this isolation did not halt China's progress, it ignited its ascent. Instead of negotiating for a seat on the International Space Station ISS, China chose to build a space station of its own design, launched and operated entirely independently. The result was Tiangong, a symbol of self-reliance and, more importantly, a platform for China's global ambitions in space. What sets Tiangong apart is not just its technical achievement, but its cooperative strategy. Unlike the ISS governed by an exclusive club of wealthy nations, China has opened its doors to developing countries, nations that have long been excluded from meaningful participation in large-scale space missions. Through the vision of a shared future in space for all mankind, China extends an inviting message: space belongs to humanity, and no one should be left behind. The list of countries currently joining or preparing to join this alliance is rapidly expanding. Pakistan stands out as one of China's closest and most enduring partners. Beyond satellite cooperation, Pakistan is preparing to send its first astronaut to Tiangong, a historic milestone for its national space program. Venezuela, a Latin American country under heavy US sanctions, has also embraced China as a much-needed partner. Nations like South Africa, Egypt, and Algeria, powerhouses in Africa, have signed agreements to collaborate in research, workforce training, and satellite data sharing. Importantly, China's cooperation isn't limited to countries with aligned politics. Nations traditionally neutral or previously aligned with the West, such as UAE, Kazakhstan, Ethiopia, and Thailand, have also joined. They benefit from access to state-of-the-art infrastructure without the political strings often attached to Western partnerships. Even some European countries, Italy, France, Switzerland, have engaged in joint microgravity, biomedical, and material science experiments with China, underscoring Tiangong's growing scientific appeal. Why are these nations eager to enter Beijing's orbit? The answer lies in three key concepts: opportunity, equality, and strategy. Opportunity, because most developing nations lack the resources to build space programs from scratch. Gaining access to Tiangong means they can, for the first time, conduct space experiments, train specialists, and gain global recognition for their scientific capabilities. Equality, because China does not impose political preconditions. There are no demands to align ideologically or militarily in exchange for cooperation. On the contrary, China often provides funding, technical assistance, and launch services, helping smaller countries deploy satellites and access valuable space data. Strategy, because this alliance is not merely about science, it's about shaping a new global order. Through this initiative, China expands its influence, builds long-term partnerships, and challenges the US-dominated model of space governance. Geopolitically, China's space alliance poses a serious challenge to the West, with the ISS expected to retire by 2030. Tiangong, modern and expanding, might soon become the world's only functioning space station. That means any country wishing to conduct orbital science after 2030 may need to go through China. Unless a counterbalance emerges, Beijing will not only dominate the orbital space infrastructure, but also command a global network of loyal partners from Asia and Africa to Latin America, bound not by coercion, but by pragmatic benefit. From being cast out, China has now become a space alliance architect quietly, but effectively. Every co-launch satellite, every trained astronaut, every shared dataset becomes a link in a growing chain of trust and influence. Tiangong is no longer just a space station, it is the foundation of a new space order, one where China is not only rising but inviting the world to rise with it. Why is the United States shocked? China's quiet yet determined rise in space exploration is not merely a technological achievement, it is a direct challenge to the long-standing dominance of the United States. Where once the US regarded outer space as its home turf, now it must watch as a rival not only catches up in technology, but begins to command the leadership narrative of international cooperation with an entirely new model. The first reason the United States is visibly unsettled is the loss of monopoly over the global space order. For over 6 decades, the US and its Western allies maintained a central role in virtually all major space initiatives, from the Apollo program to the International Space Station ISS and Mars missions. Today, however, China has not only gone independent but is inviting other nations to help build a parallel space ecosystem, a second planet in terms of collaboration philosophy. This is no longer a simple race between two superpowers. It is a restructuring of global influence, soft power, and scientific legitimacy. Second, the US is deeply concerned about the growing geopolitical coalition forming around China, one that advances not through loud declarations, but through concrete, strategic engagement. From Asia to Africa, from Latin America to the Middle East, a growing number of nations, particularly developing countries, are turning to China and the Tiangong space station rather than the ISS. Many of these nations, previously considered within America's sphere of influence, are now forging scientific ties with Beijing. From Washington's perspective, this feels like losing the building blocks of global influence, brick by brick, without any effective tools to stop it. Another startling realization for the US is the unintended consequences of its own isolation policies. The Wolf Amendment of 2011, designed to block China from accessing American space technology, inadvertently forced China to become self-reliant. Over the past decade, while NASA relied on Russian rockets for astronaut transport, China quietly built an entire space infrastructure, from the Beidou satellite navigation system to the Tiangong space station, without a trace of Western involvement. The more the West shut China out, the more it became independent. Yet perhaps what worries Washington most is not the technology itself, but the soft militarization of this emerging alliance. Space has always been a dual-use domain. Technologies developed for science can easily serve military purposes. From surveillance satellites and encrypted communications to orbital hypersonic weapons, the line between civilian and military is thin. China's ability not only to master these technologies, but also to selectively share them with partner nations is a serious concern for US defense strategy, not through direct conflict, but by quietly shifting the balance of power. Finally, the United States is shocked because of a more symbolic fear, the fear of losing the dream of space, a dream that once defined America's global image. Since Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, the US has been the embodiment of aspiration, progress, and the future of humanity in space. But now, as developing nations begin to look east, to Beijing, for astronaut training, research missions, and satellite development, the image of America as the futuristic leader begins to dim. China doesn't need to surpass the US in every technological metric. It only needs to become the world's preferred partner in space, and for America, that represents a shock greater than any rocket launch. China's motivations. Behind China's remarkable ascent in the field of space exploration lies not just the ambition to reach the stars, but a deeper strategy to reshape the global order technologically, geopolitically, and symbolically. In this context, Tiangong is not merely a space station. It is a strategic observatory from which China looks out at the world and invites the world to look back no longer as a latecomer, but as a guiding force. China's most apparent motivation is to assert itself as a comprehensive global power in the 21st century. If the 20th century was marked by the space race between the US and the Soviet Union, China is now writing a new chapter, one in which space is no longer a privilege of two superpowers, but a stage for multipolar emergence. To Beijing, mastering space is a declaration, China is not only an economic powerhouse, it is also a technological leader capable of blazing a trail for others to follow. Parallel to this is China's strategy of influence through cooperation rather than confrontation. While the West continues to operate a selective and exclusive model of space collaboration, China has opened a wide door for developing countries that have long been excluded from space ventures. By inviting them to conduct research aboard Tiangong, assisting with satellite launches, and sharing Earth observation data, China is not only enhancing its credibility, but also building a web of soft dependencies where trust, mutual benefit, and influence are woven together through technical cooperation. Another key motivation is to extend the Belt and Road Initiative BRI into orbit. On Earth, China invests in railways, seaports, and telecommunications. In space, it is now building a space belt, a constellation of nations linked by data, satellites, and infrastructure. The goal isn't just scientific, it's about creating a technological alliance system, with China as the hub, providing capabilities and setting new standards. Finally, China sees a historic opportunity. As the International Space Station ISS approaches retirement around 2030, a leadership vacuum will emerge. Beijing makes no secret of its ambition to become the sole operator of a functioning space station, positioning Tiangong as the primary gateway to space for most of the world. This isn't merely a scientific achievement, it's a symbol of power in a new era, where those who control space shape the future. Outlook: a space Cold War. As the rivalry between China and the United States extends beyond Earth's atmosphere, one pressing question emerges: are we entering a new Cold War, this time not on land, but among the stars? The warning signs are increasingly clear. On one side stands NASA and its traditional allies Europe, Japan, Canada, Australia, who continue to operate the International Space Station ISS as a symbol of long-standing cooperation. However, the ISS is approaching retirement by 2030. On the other side is China and its expanding network of partners across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, backed by the young and modern Tiangong space station, ready to welcome the world after the ISS fades away. This evolving landscape has created two distinct poles in space. No longer is there a unified space ecosystem for all humanity. Instead, there are two systems, two space stations, two satellite networks, and two competing philosophies. One side emphasizes strict regulation, technical oversight, and standardized governance. The other side focuses on shared infrastructure, equal access, and the depoliticization of space. As with all systemic rivalries, this polarization is becoming an irreversible reality. That the real danger is not in the technology itself, it lies in how the technology is leveraged as a tool of influence and potentially weaponized through control of information and prestige. Earth observation satellites can track military movements. Positioning systems can guide missiles with pinpoint accuracy. Space stations can host experiments with dual-use applications. In this context, space development is no longer purely scientific, it is a strategic battlefield, where falling behind means losing global leadership. We must also consider the possibility of emerging space defense alliances. The US has already established the Space Force. NATO is now recognizing space as its fifth domain of operations. Meanwhile, China continues to develop anti-satellite capabilities and orbital surveillance technologies. Neither side wants war, but mutual suspicion, lack of transparency, and competition for influence may drive humanity into a space Cold War. Cold in the absence of gunfire, but hot with geopolitical intensity in every sense. Still, there is room for hope. Countries such as France, India, Brazil, and the UAE are trying to position themselves as bridges between these two systems. They advocate for space autonomy, multilateral dialogue, and neutral cooperation through platforms like UNUSA, the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. A space Cold War might yet be avoided if major powers accept a multipolar reality, embrace transparency, and commit to a universal code of conduct that keeps science at the forefront of space endeavors. But for that to happen, the world must act with strategic patience and a grand vision. Otherwise, the prospect of a space Cold War will no longer be speculation, it will become the next chapter of history, one whose consequences will not only fall back to Earth but echo through the farthest orbits above us. Conclusion. China's rise in the realm of space exploration is no longer mere technical achievement, it is a strategic global shift that is actively reshaping the balance of power in the 21st century. Once excluded from the spacefaring elite, China has transformed isolation into motivation, disadvantage into opportunity, and most crucially a national dream into a tool of international influence designed entirely on its own terms. The space alliance that China is building is not merely a network of countries conducting experiments or launching satellites. It represents a new ideological ecosystem, one in which access to space is no longer determined by geography, politics, or wealth. It is a declaration that in a new multipolar world, progress is no longer the exclusive domain of a few superpowers, but can be led by any nation with the vision, determination, and resilience to claim its place. While the West remains entangled between legacy and future, balancing the fading relevance of the ISS with the promise of private space ventures, China has already constructed a parallel reality, a functioning Tiangong, a growing network of partners, and an increasingly solidified position as a global space leader. The United States may be shocked, but what's more concerning is its slow and inconsistent strategic response to this emerging order. The question is no longer, is China taking the lead? But rather, how will the rest of the world respond to a new space order already taking shape? If humanity wishes space to remain a domain of peace, science, and collaboration, it will require shared rules, transparent commitments, and a vision that transcends competition. But if we allow the playing field to be dominated solely by those who move faster, act bolder, and endure longer, the future of space will not only be a place of discovery, it will become a mirror reflecting the geopolitical order down here on Earth. China has taken the stage. The next chapter of this story will either be written by a world united or by the one actor that never stopped writing. Space is no longer a distant dream, it's where nations are redrawing the lines of power, vision, and the very future of humanity. If this video sparked new thoughts or gave you a clearer perspective, consider subscribing, turning on notifications, and sharing it with those who care about the world beyond headlines. Thank you for watching until the very end. We'll meet again with broader views and deeper questions.